I thought I'd go live a little sooner, since this is actually the first time I will be going live, or I'm going live, I should say, um, through Riverside. Just checking YouTube, see if that is going well. It seems to be going well. Just need to um, edit a few details, of course, because it just says welcome to our live show. Uh, so let's just do a very basic title for the moment. Talking Nephilim with Gary Wayne. That will do for now. All other things I will edit once the recording has ended, once everything has been recorded. Hope I am. Hope you can hear me all clearly. Hope you can hear me well. Let's see. Get a shareable link. I am very much looking forward to this podcast, to this guest. Uh, uh, oh. That's not what I meant. No. Can't type. Yes. So, as I mentioned, as you may have heard already, I will be having Gary Wayne on the podcast. Yes, Gary Wayne, the Nephilim guy, Nephilim, Anunnaki. Not sure if there is a difference, but hey, that's why I have him on. I have talked about the Nephilim earlier already with Paul Stubbs. I talked with him about how the Nephilim resembled clowns, or what we nowadays would recognize as clowns. That was a very interesting show. That was a very interesting recording. It seems to be all going well with the live stream. It is recording, uploading, and streaming as I speak. That is awesome. But yeah, I have talked with Paul Stubbs, who literally wrote the book on it, about how the Nephilim looks like clowns. Today we will be tackling it from a different perspective, more of a biblical perspective, if you will, because that is, of course, where we know the Nephilim from, where we know the Anunnaki from. I definitely have some questions. Haven't read Gary his book fully. I was fortunate enough to find a decent online copy, so I have read the at least the first 300 pages or so. His book is 1,000 some pages. I couldn't possibly read them all in a single day, but I have a idea of what he wrote. I wrote the most interesting chapters, wrote the most interesting stuff that I could find. Filming from a different angle right now, so that it actually looks like I will be talking to my guest. I noticed that with the other angle, I've noticed that I believe in the previous recording that I was like looking this way while my guest would appear on that side. So that's a little weird. Trying something new, trying a different angle, trying a different well, yeah, different angle. I mean, still my still my good angle. Fortunately, yes, I do have good and bad sides, as do we all. Oh, and something I totally forgot to mention. I have Jin the Ninja, Wukong Reborn, as my co-host for today. Um, Always good having Jen on, whether it is as a guest or as a co-host. Very knowledgeable guy. I know that he has done things about the Nephilim before. And there is my guest for today, showing up right on time. Actually, 5 minutes, 5 minutes to spare. Nice.
Well, good to be here.
Yeah, thank you for joining. I thought I'd go live a little earlier just to see if everything works as it should.
It's good.
Um, yeah, no, all is good. I can hear you. I can hear you well. I can see you. I can see you well. So yeah, should be all good.
Good. Just double check my audio is good. You said my camera angle is good as well.
Yes, sir.
Terrific.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I introduce to you the man who literally wrote the book on the Nephilim, on the Anunnaki, Mr. Gary Wayne. Thank you so much for joining me on the show. It's great to have you on. It's going to be an interesting show for sure.
Yeah, so thank you for the kind introduction and the invitation, and so happy to be here to talk to your audience and maybe talk about things that people haven't really thought about or haven't connected all of the dots on. So I certainly wouldn't say I was the first one to write about giants, but I think I did it in a way that nobody else has done it before. And I've written two books on that. And that I think it sort of changed the whole conversation on how we look at giants and what was that culture, what was that civilization, and what's the impact for today. So I think, I never sort of tire talking about it. It's not the only thing I like to talk about, but it is one of the most fascinating things that is probably one of the greater mysteries of our common legacy in history.
Yeah, no, it is. I mean, everyone still, or I wouldn't say everyone. Like in my circles, the more spiritual pagan circles, like we are all pretty much convinced that giants either were real or perhaps still are real. There are still so many unexplained things in this world. We think we know it all, but we absolutely do not. Um, and the Nephilim is one of those. I mean, it's coming from a more religious point of view, but still, it is a being that is very very interesting, very controversial as
Yeah.
well. Even though it says clearly in the Bible, and like that's the quote that everyone always goes to. There were giants in those days,
Yeah.
as well as after. So I don't know why people still want to say that. Oh no, that's not true. You know, there definitely weren't, and it's definitely not something that's been covered up multiple times.
Yep. Yeah, you would think it would be more Christianity promoting the concept from a Christian perspective,
Yeah,
um, but it is absolutely suppressed. And I would take a step back and I would say that um, you have different versions of giants all around the world, and they have the same common story. So the lens that is talked about in these giants are, is it a polytheist lens or is it a monotheist lens? And then you have the deniers on both sides. And I don't mean to say that in a degrading sort of way. Your people are free to believe what they want to believe. But they're all the accounts that support giants around the world tell a similar story, just through that different lens. And if we can understand that they're talking about the same events, not necessarily the same characters,
Yeah.
but sometimes the same characters, then we can see both sides of the story. And then when you have all of the information, you can make your own decision as to, do I accept the polytheist side? Do I accept the monotheist side? Or do I reject both? And that's all I try and do, is provide information to people. And what's really interesting in the Christian church is that in Genesis 6:4, we're referring to as the passage that is identifying Nephilim, and that's the Hebrew word for the word giant. And
Yeah.
so the Christian dogma is to say that, well, it's an exaggeration. They weren't really giants. And the sons of God weren't really angels or gods. And they try and reimagine and reinvent, but that's a polytheist aspect of an interpretive approach. But it's a convenient interpretive approach to ignore something that you really don't want to deal with. So, and clearly in the Old Testament, we know the sons of God are angels as it's understood in the Old Testament.
Mm.
In Job 1:6 to 1:34, 4 through 38, 4 through 7. Particularly, the sons of God are equated with the morning stars that were celebrating at the time of creation, and that these are the sons of the Most High in the council of the gods in Psalms 82, which is another really interesting sort of overlay into the polytheist accounts of prehistory.
Yeah.
And so we look at the word Nephilim, and they say, well, you could describe that as a bully. Well, you can. You can describe that as a tyrant, and you can. But the thing is they say, well, we should apply those meanings, and that then doesn't mean that they're necessarily giants. But that's misinformation that they repeat as disinformation all of the time. So if you look at that word bull or bully,
Mm-hmm.
and you can make this case on both sides of the religious sort of manner, that is a word that goes back into prehistory to the original parent gods before the flood, or the offspring gods after the flood. So whether it's Baal, or it's a Sumerian god, whether it's Anu or Anki, the gods were known as bulls.
Mm.
And they're recorded as such in texts like the Ugaritic text, when it's talking about the Baalim and the council of the gods on Mount Saphon or Mount Hermon, as we would know that biblically, and that these are the bulls of Bashan. And we get the bulls of Bashan in the Bible throughout. There's a feast of the sacrifice of the bulls of Bashan in the end time. You also have the bulls of Bashan that are there mocking Jesus on the cross in the book of the Psalms as a prophecy. And so the offspring, whether or not that it's in the Sumerian Greek or Ugaritic texts and others, the offspring, the demigods of the giants, of the gods were the giants, and they were also called bulls. So like Gilgamesh is called a great bull as one example, but that's a common term. So that word bull and bully is more definitive in supporting the veracity of the giants, because the giants are the offspring of the original bulls and the bull cult of the
Yeah.
Antediluvian epoch. And that word tyrant goes back to tyrannos and tarwanos, and that's of the Gyges, or the Gyes in plural, with the Y being, the G being pronounced as a Y when it's followed by an E or an I in Greek,
Mm-hmm.
and comes from the original Greek word gyges or Gyes in plural for giant. And that these were the Herculides bloodlines of kings after the flood. So from the Cretazans of Zeus and Alcmene to produce Hercules, which produced a series of giant kings that we know as Gyges, are known as Gog and Magog after the flood, just as giants were known by similar names before the flood that were the sons of Iapetus. And Clydo, or Clyme, sometimes I confuse the two between Poseidon and Iapetus, but they are giants that were created before the flood, and they were known as the Tyrannos because of their terrible rule, of the
Yeah.
horrible things that they did. And so that word Tyrannos goes right back to giant kings again. And so you can't really get away from it. But what if you really want to reimagine what something says, then you'll use that. And in Greek and in Hebrew, you have multiple meanings for the word. So you have to pick the proper meaning for the translation. And particularly a higher standard I would ask Christians to do as they do that is you can't create a translation because of your preconceived agenda. It can't conflict with anything else. Otherwise, you've probably picked the wrong meaning. And
Yeah.
in this case, they're trying to downgrade giants to just, well, they're just a little bit taller. They're just sort of warriors. Well, they were a
Yeah.
tribe of
Oh,
giants. They were a tribe of warriors, or they were the mighty ones of old. They were the heroes of old, as they were called in Greek mythology. And heroes were defined as the offspring of giants, offspring of angels or gods, and human females or human males. And demigod was what they were called, which is also defined in the ancient term as being the offspring of the gods and humans.
yeah. No, that's one thing that um, that always irks me when people are just trying to blow it off as like, oh no, that's just metaphorical. You know, they
Yep.
weren't real giants. They were just people just had a overactive imagination back
Yeah.
then. You know, they weren't as sophisticated as we are now. Even though I do question that as well. Like, are we that sophisticated? So yeah, no, they were just, you know, they were just making it up. They were
Yep.
just fantasizing.
It's
Um,
crazy. And they were fantasizing with the identical details all over the world, which is
yeah.
sort of mathematically impossible. And one example, and this is for a post-Diluvian giant with, let's say, we'll take it from Gilgamesh,
Hmm.
because he's recorded in the Ugaritic text, and there's several Sumerian texts, but they all have the same height and width to Gilgamesh. And he's sixth generation after the flood, and he's son of King Lugubanda of Uruk and the fertility goddess Nin, and is called a bull, and is a hairy black beard, kind of like as you see Gilgamesh being depicted, or Nimrod being depicted. He was the black haired with big bushy black beard variety. There's different varieties of the giants too. But in this case, we're talking about Gilgamesh, who is 11 cubits tall and 4 cubits wide. And
Hmm.
so there's several cubits that come out of ancientology, but out of the Middle East, you settle in on two for the most part. One is a common cubit of 18 inches, and one is a
Hmm.
royal cubit of 21 inches. And so he's the king of Uruk. So he'd be measured on a 21 inch. And as Josephus testified to, is because they're all of royal bloodlines and kings, that you should always measure the giants on the royal cubit of 21 inches. So he's going to be 19 feet tall on a royal cubit, or close to 17 feet tall on a common cubit. But I go for
That's a
the
big guy.
royal cubit, and 7 feet wide, and or about 6 feet wide, depending on the cubit again, but I think wider. And he's recorded this exactly the same way in every account, and there's multiple accounts. Even when he's not called Gilgamesh, let's like Itzubar, it's the exact same story. It's just a different transliterated name for
Yeah.
Gilgamesh. And it was not uncommon for gods and kings to have multiple names, so, or being transliterated a little bit differently into other languages. And so biblically, we even get giants, like with Goliath, with a dimension, and he's 6 cubits and a span. So a nice little comparative, right? And
Yeah.
that Josephus says measure him on the royal cubit. And so he would be 11 feet 1 inches wide, or tall. So not as tall as Gilgamesh, but still a giant nonetheless, and was classified
Yeah.
as stout. And the bed of King Og was put on display in Rabbah for many years after the Exodus Wars
Hmm.
in Moab. and just to show future generations of the giants that they actually fought in the Exodus Wars. And that was to be not only a archetype of the type of giants and the size, but also their dimensions in terms of height to width ratio, which was usually 2 to 1. So because they were stout, they were wide, they were muscular, they weren't, and
Oh,
so they weren't just tall and gangly. And
no.
so that was 9 cubits wide for his bed, which was made of iron because it wouldn't hold his weight, and 4 cubits wide. So again, 21 inches wide as king of Ashtaroth and Edrei in Bashan and Mount Hermon, where giants biblically were created, um, ruling that area, and also the cities of the Baalim and the Ugaritic text. And he's a Rephaim as opposed to Nephilim because he's a post-Diluvian giant. And he would have been somewhere between 12 to 15 feet tall to fit into that bed. So I would put him about 4 to 5 feet wide and 12 to 15 feet tall. And
Wow.
so, and he's classified as the last of the Rephaim after the flood. So, last of the second sort of incursion of giants after the flood of that kind of giant. And the Rephaim come from Baal and Anat after the flood in the Ugaritic text, versus El before the flood as the parent god who would have created Nephilim giants. So biblically, and I try and educate Christians on this, is try and separate the first incursion of giants created before the flood, whether or not you think some of them survived or not, from the second incursion that's recorded not only in the Sumerian text, the Greek text, the Bible, and elsewhere. Technically, you have to do a little bit of bridging to get there for the second incursion in the Bible, but they do show up, and we get a lot of references that indicate how and where they were recreated, and that these were typically after the flood in the covenant land, blonde-haired, pale-skinned, and red eyes versus, and blue eyes, and red hair, hazel eyes, and pale skin versus the dark-haired, brown eyes, and pale skin of the
Yeah.
Sumerian giants. And similarly, that sort of Aryan variety, that dark-haired Aryan variety, goes through the Greek Empire, through Greece, through Syria, with giants like that, which is why Hercules is typically sort of depicted as being dark-haired, but it's not clear from the god that he's created from that he should be. So that's
Mm,
interesting in
If
itself.
if he's
So
from the Mediterranean, the people there are more dark haired than
they
people
are, but the
up north
Scythians,
here in
the
Europe.
Scythians that would be more to the north in the east, but sort of classified as the Proto-Greek people that the migrations from a biblical perspective intermarried with. These were blonde-haired,
Mhm.
red-haired, blue-eyed, hazel-eyed, pale-skinned giants, and they were understood as the source people of the. And there's 4 to 5 different groups of Indo-Aryans after the flood. These are the source groups for the Tuatha De Danann, or the Sade, or the Shea people,
Yeah.
and the blonde-haired ones go up north to Germany, into Russia, and into Norway, and more of the red-haired variety goes over to England, over to Scotland, over to Ireland. This is the tribe of Danu, as they're also known as, or Anu is the parent god before the flood of the Sumerian pantheon, and that Tuatha De Danann were both before and after the flood. So again, either they survive or they're recreated, or both.
Yeah.
And so in the Middle East, they're understood as Titans, which can be a god of heaven or an offspring of the gods, just as Atlas is both a titan and a hero.
Yeah, because
And
the Titans were like the first generation after the gods, I believe, or
well,
they were.
depending on how you define the titan. So typically, Atlas is the son of one of the sons of Poseidon. He's an offspring god. So Poseidon
Okay,
would be an
all right.
offspring god of the parent gods that ruled before the flood. So you can classify that second generation as titans as well. And you can
Yeah,
also
okay.
classify the first generation as titans, as they do in Greek mythology as well. And then heroes were also called titans. And in the Middle East, you had an interesting um, pronunciations of the D's and the T's that changed as you went through different cultures. So Titan could be equated with the tribe of Danu, and they're understood and written down in the Ugaritic text as the
Mhm.
Datanu. So you drop the U off of that, which is just a
Yeah.
suffix, which is a Sumerian suffix, and that D can be pronounced as a D or a T, and vice versa. So you can get Titan in the Greek language or Dadan in Hebrew as it comes out of that.
Oh,
So it could be
that actually,
Dadan and Dadanu, and Dadan is part of Tuatha De Danann.
yeah. No, that actually makes a lot of sense because here in Northern Europe, we do see our gods as, um, well, as giants, as beings who are in every way really larger in stature and in power than we are, and
Yep.
if they are indeed, um, of the Titans or of Titan descent, yeah, they would be incredibly large. But at the same time, I do find it interesting that in, well, at least Norse Germanic mythology, you have the god Thor, or Donar as we know him best. He is actually fighting the giants. He did, or yeah, fighting trolls, fighting giants, but at the same time also being offspring of a giant. His mother was Yort, the goddess of Earth. So many of the European gods in our texts, in our stories, are either giants or Jotun
Yep. And
themselves or
and
the
that
offspring of them.
and that's common throughout the world. So, and there are demigods. So it all depends: is are they um, a parent god, or are they offspring of two gods to create the offspring gods, or are they the offspring of a god and a human? So there's a
Yeah.
hierarchy within that, and again, it still goes back to Odin as the post-diluvian head of the gods, and Thor as his son,
Yeah.
as I recall. And and in, let's say, in Greek history, for example, you have hero worship that was very, very common
Yeah.
in the Middle East. And that was the worship that went to the ruler who died, whose body didn't go to sleep, and would come back and haunt them. And they would do rituals and sacrifices to ward off that disembodied spirit. And that would be a demigod that would happen to, because they're not as powerful as a true God. They can't recreate
Understand.
a
Yeah.
body and a soul for that spirit to dwell in. And it's known as the vagabond ghost demons in Southeast Asia. Same story. And they
Mhm.
come back and they would use talismans and all sorts of things to prevent this disembodied spirit who is very, very upset because it can't interact physically in the same way with the world
Yeah.
that it did before, would come back and do terrible things to them. So this is a common, again, history. We just sort of define it a little bit different in most of the cultures.
Yeah.
And we understand this as the demons in the Bible. And these are disembodied spirits. And so we get those as, from a apocrypha level. If you look at the book of Enoch, they're called the
Mhm.
evil spirits, and spirits of the giants after their bodies died. And in the Bible, we understand these as the ones that Jesus was dealing with that possessed people. And in those accounts, particularly in the King James Version Bible, they're called evil spirits, unclean spirits, and devil spirits, which is a bad translation there. Horrible
Yeah.
translation for devil spirit, because it's the Greek word daemon, the root word for English
Oh
demon.
no, that's
And
something
and
entirely
if you're
different.
going to use devil, it should be diablos in Greek.
Yeah.
that is used for Satan in the rest of the Bible. And what's interesting about the post-Diluvian giants, we get more information of them because we get more information on post-Diluvian or after the flood history anyways. The giants, as I said, after the flood were Raphaim. They're recorded in the Ugaritic text as it's in Semitic, and Hebrew is a Semitic language, and it used to be vowelless. So the original Ugaritic texts are RPM, just as the original Nephilim would have been NPL. And then you put the vowels in as the language evolves, and then both the H in both Rephaim and Nephilim as the Hebrew language evolved. But the same words, but it's the RPM or Rephaim that are recorded in the Ugaritic text. And these were kings of the tribes of Datanu, or the assembly of Datanu, that were reporting to the Baalim council on Mount Hermon, Mount Zaphon, as it's recorded in the Ugaritic text. And that these Rapiu or Rapium, as you get the transliteration into English out of the original Semitic Ugaritic text, are kings, giants, dynastic rulers, and healers. And so that word translates into Hebrew as Rapha, singular, Raphaim, plural, and Rapha 7495 in a biblical concordance into the Hebrew language means healer. And these giants could not only heal themselves, but heal others.
Yeah.
But when they did die, they would be paraded into the other world to be with the gods, and they would all join. They had the ability to go interdimensionally. And so 7495 is the root word for 7496, which is a disembodied spirit, a demon spirit, an evil spirit as it's defined in Hebrew. And 7497 is the word Raphaim. All are associated with the post-Diluvian giants. And one would presume the Nephilim giants would have had the same powers. They just had more power and were probably larger.
Okay, so would all demons be giant offspring, or because I do imagine at a certain point you're kind of running out of giants, because there are, well, a whole bunch of demons and demon kings and generals if you go by the idea of the multi-layered hell, as for example in described in Dante's Inferno. Um, so is it then just giants that are demons? Because I know little about them. I know that in the Bible or any any text, really, demons is kind of a catch-all term for any bad spirit, and especially during the well, let's call them the pagan crusades. Um, Everything that was not of Christian faith or
Sure.
of biblical text was a demon. I hear that a lot still. That
Yeah.
my gods are just demons in disguise trying to
Yeah.
trick me.
So yeah, and demons is a reimagined term for a lot of applications for people's agendas that were used in the past and misrepresented. And daemon in Greek mythology is a lower form of avatar spirit, where uh, the many of the great sort of Greek kings and writers would want to have a daemon spirit that was adding strength, power, knowledge, whatever to them. And they looked at it as more of a positive thing. But when we look at the definition from a Christian perspective, it is like a ghost. It's a ghost spirit, and it's a
Okay,
disembodied spirit and shouldn't be over applied. And I'll get to the different kinds in just a second, but I just thought I'd
sure.
lay a little bit better platform down so people follow what we're talking about. And that um, in the Christian belief is when you die, your body goes to sleep That's the soul and the body. And there's three parts. There's a spirit, there's a
Yeah.
soul, and a body. And the spirit merges with the soul. And the soul and the body is what they call an oikotarian, a dwelling place for the spirit, as it comes out of the Greek for how it's used for habitation and house in heaven in the New Testament. I won't go into too much minutiae on that. And that not only did spirit beings like angels have the ability to create their own oikotarians at will, a soul and a body, they could take
Hmm.
any form and size that they wanted to interact physically in the world. They can be here as opalescent spirit beings, but they don't interact in the same sort of way. And so do the uh, offspring of the gods, which is a counterfeited spirit, because spirits biblically all come from heaven. And
Yeah.
these spirits are passed on by the fallen angels or the gods into their offspring. And so the offspring of fallen angels and humans and any other DNA manipulation or other things that they would put in would still receive that counterfeit spirit or that Xerox spirit of the god. And that these spirits don't die when the body dies.
Hmm.
And so they're going to go to three places, either to directly to Hades, the other world, Valhalla, Argatha, the 1,000 different words, Sheol, around the world for the same place where their gods rule from.
Yeah.
Or they're going to go, in some cases, if they're part of the terrible ones from a monotheist perspective, to the pit prison or the abyss prison. And or the other thing that's going to happen to them is they're going to wander the earth, because they're not able to get to heaven. And these are the demon spirits that we see running around. So a lot of humans think they're talking to the spirits of their ancestors only if you have giant ancestors. So
Yeah.
I would make that
Yeah.
qualification. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't different types of beings that the giants created.
Hmm.
I mean, I'm sorry, that the gods and fallen angels created. So that if you get the little people, and of course your elementals, your fairies, your elves of the Norse tradition, these are
Yeah.
all offspring of the gods. It's recorded on that in all polytheist cultures around the world. And they're distinct from the giants, and typically they're smaller, except for the white elves, which would be more of a, as opposed to the dark elves, this would be more of an allegory that's come down through history to qualify as the pale skinned. White elves would be like the Tuatha De Danann or the giants,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Versus the little ones. And there's four groups of elementals in polytheism, again, all around the world, absolutely standard. And so three of those groups are small ones. You have good looking fairies, you have mischievous fairies, and you have ugly fairies. And they're in these three different groups. And there's a whole bunch of different kinds within those groups, and they were all created to do specific things for the gods or the demigods, like making weapons for the demigods, for example, like the Hobbit would be part of the ugly ones living in the earth and the mountains, and they manufactured the weapons for the demigods.
Yeah.
And
The dwarves. In Germanic
I mean, yeah, the
mythology, they
dwarves, not the
are.
hobbits. I'm
Yeah.
sorry, you're correct. Yes.
No,
And
I understand
yeah,
both little
yeah.
creatures,
And
but
then
yeah,
the fourth
the
group
dwarf.
are the salamanders. They're taller than humans and they're more reptilian in base,
Ah.
and they tend to live in the earth. And then you see different kinds of warriors and giants created by the gods around the world. You could have the lion warriors, and they're known by different names all around the world, whether it's the Urmalu, or the lion men of Moab in the Bible. And you also have a strong tradition of dogmen, dog warriors, dog Nephilim all around the
Yeah.
world. You also have a tradition of the Tengu all around the world. And these are bird-faced giants and priests, mostly in Southeast Asia, but you also get that with the Quixamaya in Central America with the Xibalba and Camazotz, which is the house of the Batman, as you translate that into
Oh
English.
wow.
Yeah. And so you have also creatures like the centaurs in Greek mythology that are created
Hmm.
completely different. They're created by Hera within a cloud. And they're a distinct kind of being in Greek mythology than from the Nephilim. Not that they're not, they seem to have some sort of DNA manipulation involved there. and they're not as big, but they play a great role. They actually were mentors in a lot of cases to the post-Diluvian giants in Greek history. And then you have the chimera creatures,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah. You
these
have
have
like,
multiple types of beings. And the best example of a chimera giant would be King Hababa or King Hambama, and known by two or three other different transliterations in various translations of the Epic of Gilgamesh. He was called the Terrible One, anointed by the gods, created by the gods to do terrible things to humankind. And he ruled from the cedar forest on Mount Hermon, because Nippur was on Mount Hermon in that tradition. Not saying it's the only holy mountain around the world, because you could go probably up to at least 7 on that, on all the different accounts of where some of these councils were said to be at, whether or not they're just a local tradition for a main central place um, for the assembly of the gods and the assembly of the giants. Hard
yeah,
to know, but there are at least 7 holy mountains around the world. And that this cedar
mountains and forest
forest,
trees.
yeah,
Yeah.
he had multiple types of creatures, from, you know, horse parts to snake parts to all sorts of different things. It's just an incredible description of this individual, that Enki and Gilgamesh went and slew and got into trouble because he had the authority of the gods, which is why Enkidu was killed. And they're all 2/3 god and 1/3 human, which is really interesting, because that's a little bit different than the understanding of demigod,
Yeah,
right?
because those are like 50-50.
50-50. Yeah.
Yeah.
And yet these giants are a little bit bigger. So maybe they have more of, somehow, either through DNA manipulation or something else going on, that they have more God in them than human. And they're taller than the humans, so, or than the other giants, as we talked about earlier. So you get this sort of angelic God technology and knowledge that seems to be also at work in creating these other kinds of beings, both before and after the flood, because they show up both. Um, and that there's a hierarchy to these beings, whether or not they are disembodied spirits or they are still physical bodies that are ruling, and works hand in hand with the divine right to rule given to the kings or the royals, kings of God, as you take that back in its etymology, or the
Hmm.
offspring of the gods, given from the council of the gods to rule over the 70 nations as the visible ones, to do the will of the gods on earth, God's will, and in through their thelemic God's will tree organization, which is again a cedar tree from Mount Hermon, versus the thelemic genealogical tree of their bloodlines. um, and that other ones, like the little ones that are still holding physical bodies, would be also part of that. And they're also called elementals in the New Testament as well, that enslave humankind. And so you have
They
an
are
invisible
acknowledged.
hierarchy and you have a visible hierarchy that still rule
Hmm.
this world, is where I'm going, in different kinds of demonic beings, with demonic being different kinds of beings somehow from um, spawned from the gods. And I would also, just to end on it, just to throw out another little tidbit, I would also just suggest that superheroes, heroes and a demigod of today, are all based on antediluvian and early post-diluvian giants.
Oh,
Sorry guys, I'm gonna jump in here. Hey Stein, hi Gary. It's really
Hi.
nice to meet you. I'm sorry I was late. I had some connection issues. Apologize. And
that's
thanks
okay.
Stein for inviting me. So Gary, this is really interesting to me what you're saying about the superheroes, because we know that all of those early, especially Marvel writers, were involved in both Theosophy and Telema, and they were
Yeah.
in many of the ideas that they borrowed would come directly from the Puranas, maybe a little Tantra, maybe, and that's my background is Buddhist
Yep.
Tantra and Puranas and
Yep.
Indian mythology. But so yeah, I think that's really interesting thing to think about, especially like with Superman and
Yeah.
his ideas and the Elohim
Yeah.
and all of that, of
And
course, right?
yeah, and Marvel Comics is based on the description of these giants created in It's either in the second book of Enoch or the third book of Enoch. I think second book of Enoch, as the marvelous ones. And so they shorten it to Marvel Comics about these
Oh, that's
marvelous ones.
interesting.
And the first major superhero that we get in the 20th century is Superman, right? Who's a superhero. And that he comes from the house of El.
Hmm.
And, you know, him and his father's, their names are Jor-El and Dur-El of the house of El. And he's like a Magianic type of person who comes to save humanity. And you can't get any more obvious than El as being the parent god out of the Canaanite pantheon, and El as being the Hebrew word for a god or an angel, and or meaning strong and mighty is the other definitions for El. And Elohim is the plural for gods or angels, and in the superlative uppercase would be the tripart nature of monotheism and or the singular nature of, again, I'll just repeat it in case people didn't quite catch that, in the uppercase superlative sense of Elohim as the God Most High, El Elyon.
Which is interesting also because Stein is here. I'll just mention this, is that Elohim is related to Jupiter. So there's a Thor,
Yeah.
a kind of Thor relationship right there with, you know, even in the colors, even in the specific kind of like blue blood idea of the, right, the lighter colors, that turquoise color that's associated with Jupiter. So I just think that's very interesting. And
Well,
also, oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, I would say on that, I would submit that all the different pantheons of the major gods, both before and after the world, or the composite 7 major ones that we get, reflecting in the days of the week and the days and other names, they are the same gods with just different vernacular names. So like Odin is a post-Diluvian god, and he would be equivalent with Baal, son of El, and Zeus and Osiris and Anki. And so if you look across on the 7 major ones, like you said, Jupiter, right? And Jupiter is an offspring god in the Roman pantheon of Saturn. Okay, Jupiter rules after the flood, Saturn ruled before the flood. Now that's not the Etruscan Proto-Indo-Aryan name for him, but that's the Latinized name for him. Just as within Greece, we get the Greek version, but we don't get the Proto-Indo-Aryan names for them. So, but anyways, moving across the board, in Greece, Jupiter would be understood as Zeus, and that's one of those terrific sort of. And in Egypt, it would be Osiris, and in Sumeria it would be Anki, and in Canaan it would be El. The parent god, Saturn, is equivalent to Kronos in Greece, Jeb in Egypt, Anu in Sumeria, and El in Canaan, just to give a couple other examples. So if you start to take a step back and you start to say you have different vernacular names for the major gods all around the earth, things start to make sense, because polytheism, although it has different rituals wherever it has migrated to, it still has the same basic core belief system.
That it indeed does. I am not a big fan of the universalist point of view. I do think, or of course, you know, I do acknowledge that there are multiple gods, multiple pantheons, multiple tribes of gods who seem to have a lot of things in common. I know that especially in northern Eastern Europe, if you look at the Baltics, at the middle of Europe, a lot of the gods seem to coincide with each other. Although I I am not necessarily of the belief that they are the same god, or maybe not the same god anymore. Maybe that through the worship of the different European tribes and the different energies and different lands, that they did transform into being their own separate god, being their own separate pantheon. But I do acknowledge that there are a lot of commonalities.
There is. And you could also look at the Norse pantheon. When I look at it, and there's not as much writings that you can rely on. So it's some of
No,
the oral
unfortunately not.
traditions make it a little bit more difficult. But you could look at Odin as either the parent god or before the flood, or as Thor as the chief god after the flood. And you could make that work as well. The thing is, Odin is a horn god, and he seems to be more equivalent to horn gods after the flood. So whether or not you're looking at the various pan gods, or you're looking at the Cern god, which is Indo-Aryan for horn god, which is the Proto-Roman version. It could be Cernunnos in
Yeah.
um, the Celtic cultures. But there's a horn god tradition that weaves its way through that seems oddly out of place with post-Diluvian accounts. So it seems to have almost some sort of connection to before the flood and after the flood. And Azazel, which in the book of Enoch is the chief of the gods or the fallen angels, of the watchers that's thrown into the pit prison, he is a goat god or a horn god, as he's degraded from seraphim or a serpent face god angel.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting.
Sorry, Stein, I didn't mean to
No, Jin,
interrupt you.
go ahead, man.
No, I just want to say that I'm also not a universalist. Like, I don't believe all deities are exactly the same. Obviously, in Sanskrit cosmology, we have a very autistic sort of way of differentiating the different layers of gods, like Gary was describing the fairies and the nature spirits. Like, we just have like one category for that, but maybe multiple kinds of names for the races within that singular category of yaksha. But those are also a kind of god. They're just the lowest kind of god. They're the god that lives on the earth. And then you get to these like mid-heaven kind of Gandharvas, these angels, and then you have the devas who live in the heavens, but there are multiple god heavens. So this makes a lot of sense to me cosmologically. And I also think I am a little bit of a perennialist, maybe not a universalist, but I definitely think that there is a perennial system that has been spread out. I'm more of a Central Asianist, Gary, so I look more at that area, but I think it's really, we're just looking at different areas of the same, the same story, but just different geographical regions.
Yeah, and as I say, through the different polytheist lenses throughout the world and monotheist lenses, talking about the same history, the same events, just understood in a vernacular and either polytheist or monotheist lens.
Absolutely.
It's interesting that you mentioned Odin as being the antediluvian god, because there is a discussion within the pagan realms, more on the scholarly side of things, and this kind of also connects to Jupiter or Dies Pater, who is said to be Tyr or Tiwaz. And there is some discussion going on that it was originally Tyr or Tivas who was at the head of the Aesir, at the head of the pantheon, and that Odin either took over or usurped him. But I mean, as you mentioned, we have unfortunately very little written text to go off. But that actually would make a lot of sense. But then it also kind of has me questioning if we go by the apocalyptic stories or cataclysmic stories. Really, Odin perishes in Ragnarok, so the end of the world according to the Germanic mythology. And then
But that you could apply that to all of the gods.
Yeah.
If they're going to die, because by definition, if you're immortal, you cannot die. So it would take a power greater than the gods to destroy them or make them die. or there's a different definition that we don't understand at our level of understanding. And so when you look at the accounts in polytheism, they are very much identical, where the offspring gods overthrow the parent gods.
Yeah.
Right? And they kill them. Except that, can you actually kill something that's immortal? In the monotheist understanding is, if you look at before the flood, where the parent gods would rule, and this helps to understand prehistory and chronology through history, and that the offspring gods when they overthrow the parent gods, they're actually just moving up in the rank and order of the hierarchy, because if you start to overlay the monotheist understanding on it, which is that these parent gods, for creating the giants and doing all sorts of other things to destroy humanity and destroy the earth, and supplying technology and knowledge that had the capability of destroying the earth by fire before the flood, which brings the flood. But the punishment for that, for these ones that participated in that level of crimes from a monotheist perspective, went to the pit prison. So there's seen no more. And then in this case, Odin would move up, Baal would move up, Zeus would move up, Enki and Enlil would move up, Osiris would move up. In the Hebrew word is for host of heaven is Saba, which means an army of angels, or rank and order. So they would just move up in that rank and order, or in the council of the gods to take over. And it makes sense they'd have some sort of hierarchy in place. And so after the flood, when Zeus creates giants like Perseus, or Theseus, or Hercules, and Baal is creating Rephaim, and the greater Baalim are creating giants like Avim and Zamzuzim and Emim, and all sorts of giants named in the Bible from those different part of the ruling council of the gods, and did the same things that the parent gods did before the flood. These gods also die, so to speak, and disappear, even though that's not possible. And we're not told. Well, you get some accounts how Baal dies in the Ugaritic text. But again, if you follow the same MO from a monotheist perspective, if they disappeared and all the giants are doing rituals to bring them back, they've disappeared, probably gone to the pit prison as well. And I'm not saying all the gods are in the pit prison. I'm just saying the ones who violated those laws from a monotheist perspective says that they're not dead, but they're like dead because they're in the pit prison in another dimension located in Sheol or Hades or Argatha, where the abyss prison is located, awaiting the end of time, when they will go to the lake of fire, which then sort of intersects in what you're saying about Odin going to the lake of fire. But all the fallen angels will go to the lake of fire, which is different than Sheol or Hades. And it's been conflated into a term called hell into the English language, which hell has, as you look biblically, like 3 or 4 different meanings to it, and they should not have conflated it into one term. But
and most
the
of
translation is what the translation is. And the lake of fire is something different, where the punishment of the gods would go, and the second death for humans who aren't going to be permitted into eternity.
I'll offer this quickly, is that I always think of you, Stein, when the Odin comes up, because he's such a popular figure in both. I'm not a pagan, obviously Stein knows that, but in the occult circles as well as pagan circles. So I always think of this, is he somehow linked to Rudra in some ways from the Vedic text, because he has that storm god quality. And then to respond to
and with Baal and other gods like that.
Well, Baal is
gods.
There's a clearly a relationship even in the etymology between Baal, even maybe Jehovah, or it depends, obviously, right? Because everyone has their different perspective, but there is clearly a relationship with this storm mountain deity, and like a Shiva Rudra or a Rudra Bhairava, and then you're getting into the Himalayan stuff. But then I also think what Gary said was rather interesting about what happens when the gods die. Well, especially in Buddhism, we do believe the gods die. We just think that they're outside of our time perception, so their lives are much longer in their context, but they do eventually die and enter into a cycle of rebirth. So we don't necessarily believe that they go somewhere per se, although they can be reborn in any. They don't have to be reborn a god. They can be reborn in a human world or any of the other realms. But basically, that they do die, and then we also have technology. That's kind of what Vajra became later after the Vedas, is that it became this idea that you could harness it, humanity could harness it, and then wield it against these sky storm gods.
Yeah, in pagan mythology, or at least Germanic mythology, there is this. Well, of course, in this incredibly famous story of the death of Balder. Um, it doesn't really say that like he is actually um like dead like that as we know it. It's not a physical death, even though the gods, they do have a body, but still his soul, his divine energy travels to the underworld, to Helheim, which
Yeah.
I believe is where a lot of the ideas of hell come from, because even though it's not, the lake of fire and brimstone, still not
Yep.
a pleasant
And
place to
and
be.
and Book Two actually makes some of those connections to the etymology of hell, as it comes through to, at least from the English language, and I do take that Germanic and Norse source back. Then I also take it back to Satan, whose name, as it shows up in Isaiah 14, um, and he would sit above the council of the gods. He would be this nebulous life force that's in a lot of polytheism, and so that word shouldn't be translated as Lucifer. It should be translated directly out of Hebrew. So you have an Italian name for the planet Venus, and words like lux and light and things like that in Latin, which is transliterated into Lucifer, and the god of the Gnostic Freemasons, as they like to call him, is one of the names for Satan. That is actually the Hebrew word Hail El, Heylel. Um, and it should be translated exactly as that. And I look at that word as Hail as being part of the root word for hell, because he's the one who goes to the pit prison, right? Eventually, for 1,000 years, and then to the lake of fire. He has a little separate route on the time frame of going to the prison and then to the lake of fire. So you have a Italian word for the god of the Freemasons inserted into the English language for a Hebrew name that should be translated like Azazel or Michael or Gabriel. When it ends in el, that's typically an angelic name. And I won't go through the meanings of that name, but that would be the name for Satan's name in the Morning Star order, versus his name would be in the Seraphic order or the Cherubim order, and he had traits of each.
I think this is what makes this endeavor, and I think Stein will agree with me, so difficult, is because they absorb traits of so many characters around them, and it can be very it sometimes feels very fruitless to trace the origin of deities back into this kind of more nebulous, we'll say pre-first century kind of history, because it is so difficult to know where they came from. The names are new. I mean, even the magical traditions around them are new. The ritual style, even the Orthodox ritual style, is new. So yeah, I just want to say that I think it's really complicated. But well, hats off to you, Gary, for doing it.
Yeah, and you were never going to peel off exactly how that hierarchy works, or whether there's one or a few that were set up. I tend to take mine back to a base level um, of gods and names, and then would funnel all the other ones that sort of get merged in underneath. And one of the keys to it is to not get caught up too much into the detail, but just sort of look for the pattern and directionally go, but don't get too doctrinal sort of on it, but just look at the direction that it's showing. And another thing to understand is that the offspring gods inherited the mythos of the parent gods they replaced. So Zeus took on the complete mythos of Kronos, right? Cyrus took on the complete mythos of Ra. It's not that they are the same individuals, they just inherit that as part of the legacy. So when you get into Gnosticism and the Freemasons in this case, they look at Osiris, even though a parent god, as being sort of chief at the pantheon, except that they also say, but it's an allegory for Lucifer and the great architect of the universe. That's recorded in Zoroastrianism, which is sort of the Indo-Aryan religion right after the flood. And that's how they sort of rationalize it, that the ones that we have ruling after the parent gods are allegories. And then there's an allegory even for on top of Ra to represent, in their belief system, Lucifer being the top god.
I mean, I do think there's an interesting pantheon that is kind of a neo-pantheon that has developed out of these, we'll call them secret societies and magical orders, just broadly speaking. And I think that they have more, like Gary is saying, there is like a sort of competing cosmologies within them.
Yeah, well, but their belief system, though, is that, and again, I don't mean to overlay this onto the other polytheist religions around the world, but they believe that all the religions are the same religion, and that they're trying to reunite that universal religion under its original pantheon. Now, that's their belief. I think it makes a lot of sense, but that's their belief, and it's not necessarily the belief of other groups around the world. So, but I leave that for them. That's their belief system, not my belief system. And I'm just, so when I look at it and I quote from them, I'm just saying that's what they say, and that's what they're trying to do.
Absolutely. I completely agree with that. I just think it is interesting to look at the Indo-Aryan and the Sanskrit, since I have a Sanskrit background, just to look at it and then see, okay, can we connect it to the Avestan? Can we connect it to, like, what are the Iranian precedents? Yeah. And like,
so
who...
And what's interesting is with the Indo-Aryans, you get two different groups after the flood. Going to the east, two major groups, let's just put it that way. One goes into Persia, which is going to develop their Aryan bloodline of Achaemenid kings as they take their genealogies back to those dark-haired Indo-Aryans. And the other group, which is the splinter group, goes into the Indus Valley. And Zoroastrianism or Hinduism, they have the same names for the gods, with just slightly different sort of transliterated spellings, but the same pantheon. So you see Indian gods showing up all throughout the Middle East in treaties as honoring those gods. That comes from that Indo-Aryan settlement in Persia immediately after the flood. And it was the same religion as the religion that was in the Indus Valley. Now, they developed their own vernacular rituals and names and things like that as that developed. But from that nexus point, you see a very similar religion that matches up again with Indo-Aryan groups of the Scythians and other groups that are showing up immediately after the flood in the 4 to 5 groups of Indo-Aryans that are all thought to be giants in this case. So one of the ways, like, you want to go back to sort of connecting as much as you can, if you can, is try and take words and commonality like that horned god back to Indo-Aryan, which is the Indo-Aryan word CERN or KERN, and where you get CERN as an acronym that with some really interesting technology, but Cernunnos would be a derivative of that Indo-Aryan. And the German name would be, I think, more Kern as it comes out. And in the Etruscan one, it was just called CERN, only pronounced with a C, CERN, and meaning horn god, and as part of their 9 major gods, which is a little bit different than the numbers used in other ones after the flood or before the flood.
I have a quick question for you, Gary. Is that, do you have a theory as to why the religion of the Indus Valley, so what later became Hinduism or Puranic,
Yep.
But even the Vedas, obviously, is what I'm referring to.
Yep.
Why did the Vedas take the side of the Asuras rather than, or not? Excuse me. Why did they take the side of the Devas, and then the Iranians took the side of the what we would call Asuras? Yes, exactly. Sorry about that.
That's okay. So what's interesting about polytheism, and it took me a long time to sort of wrestle some of these dynamics that are in it. Not that I'm an expert on each of the polytheist religions. Again, I'm just looking for patterns and things that sort of help me sort of directionally is you learn very quickly from the outside looking in and doing research that it's a dualistic religion. And from the Western sort of version of polytheism, let's say through the secret societies and Gnosticism, is they see the macro dualism as this God of the polytheist side, this nebulous life force that in their version mated with Sophia to create the 12 archons in Gnosticism, that they would include where the God of the Bible comes from in that belief system. That you have that force fighting against the God of the Bible. And they're both very powerful angels, and that this war goes on forever. One side may get an upper hand for a while, but it goes back and forth all the time. That's the macro side. But within polytheism, there's other kinds of dualism in the micro version. And so not only do you see that in, dualist people say, well, you're just saying, a god and a goddess. Yes, but there's another dual nature to it as well. And that's good versus evil within polytheism. So you have white magic and black magic. You have good kings or giants and evil kings or giants. You have good witches, you have evil witches. Modern version, we understand that today in the local terms as white hats and black hats. And they have the same agenda. They worship the same polytheist pantheon. They just have a different way of getting to the same goal. So the white hats would be viewed as looking after the better interest of humanity, even though they have the same horrible end for us. But the black hats don't have any care about humanity, and will ultimately want to have us destroyed from this part of the earth. So in the short term, the white hats are helping humanity, and the black hats are just anti-humanity. And of course, the white and the black are at odds with each other as well. So you have these rivalries that show up within the visible representatives on the earth and the offspring and the descendants that is ongoing all of the time as well.
This makes a lot of sense from a Central Asian perspective, just in looking, even in the names of white hat and black hats, and because that is two groups of shamans and Tengriism, and obviously you know a lot about the Khans and that history. I know quite a bit, but maybe not as much as you, and so, but I do think that there is something to that, and then this repetitive idea of the 99 gods of the underworld, the 33 gods of heaven. That's constant, very perennial, very reoccurrent. You find it in Buddhism, you find it in the Vedas. It's so ubiquitous.
Yeah, it's represented in the York system of 33 times 3 is 99 in the York system, and Scottish Rite system sort of represented in that sort of understanding. And not that I know how many degrees there are, but in the old York system, it's thought that as it's based on the ancient 3 degrees is first level of adept versus first level of 33 in the Scottish Rite, which is, I know, a later tradition in the last couple hundred years, but I'll get to the connection, is that there would be original 33 degrees of knowledge, and that you would have that split from 3 times 11 for 33, and that if you were to go 3 times 33 on the Scottish Rite, that would be equivalent at 99. And they use that as an allegory to represent a hierarchy of the type of gods or beings, somehow, some way being reflective in that. So I found it very interesting when you're talking about 33 gods and 99 gods, and that's being reflected in the sacred numeral allegories of the degree system of secret societies.
Well, it is. I mean, I hate to use the aphorism, but as above and so below, and it seems to be reoccurrent. As that also seems to be a reoccurrent theme of reproducing, whether it's a preserved idea from a more arcane source or it's a more contemporary idea brought in to older tradition to sort of give it historical roots where there may or may not have been some before. So I think that there's both of those things at play.
Yeah, and it can't be a coincidence when you get those breakdowns. I mean, that's coming through thousands and thousands of years. How, it just does not make any sort of mathematical sense that would be possible. Unless there's some history to it.
I think very cosmologically significant at the very least. It's just that those numbers have inherent magical, esoteric properties, and I think that they recognize that and want to utilize that.
Sure. And in everything that they do to honor the gods all around the world, and if it's a physical manifestation, everything is done to not only honor images of the gods, celestial alignments to the gods, sacred geometry to the gods, and certain numbers that are very important to them all throughout the architecture of it, which was way beyond their capability to do, as we understand the secular side of understanding history.
Yeah, and numerology and astrology, it is weaving into so many things over many hundreds of years, and it is still being used. Like, still let's say the upper echelons of society are still very much obsessed with doing everything according to the right numerology, according to the right astrology. It's why the kings in the Middle Ages, they had their court astrologer to tell them when would be a good time to go to battle, or when would be a good time to
marry the fair maiden. Why would a Christian king have an astrologer to go to the stars of the pantheon to tell them when to go to war or not? And some of those were also called court gestures as well. It's basically they were putting a priest in their court of their religion that they could sell as a ruse to hide what they're really, where their loyalties really lied. And that makes sense because they're royals.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, just call them priests, and it is fine according to the church. You don't have to call them shamans or astrologers. They're priests. That makes it all good.
Well, it makes sense too if we're looking at it from that sort of Zoroastrian perennialism, right? Is that the Zoroastrian priests are called magi, but they, in modern Zoroastrianism, they prefer that sort of transliteration of priest for an English like title. So I think that it's drawing on that longer tradition of classifying these kind of like learned men, the sages or the mages, and they're just calling them priests because that is what a priest is. They don't, right? It's not necessarily inherently captured by cosmology.
Knowledge was so important to the polytheist religions, and gaining and accessing that knowledge in their belief on the path to godhood, that the priests had to be the wise ones. They had to be the learned ones. And they were all royals as well, just in the religious organizational structure versus the government or the military organizations that they used to run the first two classes of the world. For people not sure what I'm referring to, there's a 4-class system that's a standard around the world. And they populated the top 2 classes that I just identified. And they established the mystery schools as an extension out of the religion to teach the noble elite. And so they also dominated the oligarchic class. So they handled all of the great religions. So you would have in the bottom 2 classes, bakers, tailors, things like that, small free enterprise, and then the slave, labor, or ritual sacrifice class as the bottom. And that's the same 4-class system that was established around the world by these royales. And you can go to First Nations in North America today, and on each of those First Nations in the territories that they still hold, they have that 4-class system still in place with the bloodline chiefs, right? And then the shaman class or the medicine man, same ideology. And all through South America, it was the feudal class in Europe. It's the same system. And so they were a knowledge religion, and they felt that knowledge was one of the key parts to becoming a god, and immortality was the other one. And then you had to have the ability to discipline that knowledge through reason and other sort of knowledge tactics that you would use that knowledge for good. But even at the god level, you could see that not all of them in their belief system use that knowledge for good.
No, you see that especially with Odin, with Wotan. He is the god of wisdom, but like wisdom gained through whatever means necessary.
Yeah.
Not always as honest, or not always as nice or as clean, but
Yep.
in the pursuit of wisdom, in the pursuit of knowledge, the ends justifies the means.
Yeah.
And whether that be through trickery or self-sacrifice or whatever else is needed, it's all in the name of wisdom, of the ultimate wisdom, the ultimate
Yep.
knowledge.
And you see that tradition of Wotan in other polytheist religions as well. So you have Mercury of Greeks, who becomes a god by his knowledge and an intercessor for the dead. Thoth in Egypt. And I go through, I won't go through all the different names and all the different pantheons. And even in the book of Third Enoch, you have Enoch, which I think is son of Cain versus son of Jared in that accounting in Enoch book 3. He has his name changed to Metatron as he's raised to angelic status, and even with words as being equivalent to son of man in Third Enoch, because of his knowledge that he received. And of course, Enoch in both polytheism and monotheism receives a lot of knowledge. And Enoch from the Jared side in the Bible is actually taken to heaven because he walks with God. But Enoch, son of Cain, stays on earth and lives longer, and that's more the polytheist tradition. And again, in Gnostic and secret society and their polychronicon history, they take the patriarchs of Enoch, son of Cain. They also include Cain, but not to as high a degree. Nama, Jubal, and Nama, all mentioned in the Bible as their major patriarchs before the flood that started their secret societies and were part of the evolution of creating a religion to hold this knowledge and develop it. And to keep it away from the mundane, the Sethites and the monotheist sort of understanding of that. And then this is the knowledge and religion that crossed the flood at Babel. And then that religion travels away from Babel. But as you overlay the Indo-Aryan history on that, we see Indo-Aryans likely seeding that religion directly. But because the people at Babel are familiar with that religion that Nimrod imposed after the flood, it's the same religion that he had imposed, that they're going to go live amongst the giants that are already there, who are going to populate the top 2 classes.
That's absolutely fascinating that there are two different even, and oh,
Yeah, and how I get there with the giants being there before, when you get into the and I cover this in book 2, a little bit in book 1, but a lot in book 2, is that these names of the giants, as you get into their meanings, are intriguing, that are recorded in the Bible, but they're all classified as aboriginals of the land. So so like the Rephaim, for example, is one of the ones I talked about, but it's similar to all the names. These are the aboriginals that lived in Canaan, in this case, before the Canaanites moved there. And in biblical history and monotheist history, Babel happens about 100 years after the flood, and then you get the confusion of the languages, and then the Canaanites are going to move there. and they're going to intermarry with the Rephaim that are already there. This happens in Sumeria as well with the people that we know as the Elam. And Elam, that comes out of the genealogies of the 70 nations in the Bible. But this is a word that's being named for those Sethites, but it's an older people there that goes back to the Hebrew word olam, meaning ancient from the east, and aboriginals of the east. And these are the ones that Nimrod is going to be intermarrying with after Babel, with the Elamites or the Olam. And these are the people of the East, just as the Persians were known, as you take that etymology, as the aboriginals of the East or the Indo-Aryans of the East. And the Cadmonim, which are the ancient ones of the East, and the Kenim and the Kenazim, all meaning of the East and ancient, were tribes of that area. And they're before the people of Babel went to intermingle with them.
That's interesting because you have, I'm not that familiar with Celtic mythology, but I believe that is also the story of the Tuatha De Danann, and the Fomorians coming into the land, taking it over, marrying, and coming in the ones that were already there before, and then, like, you could even say that it repeats itself with Saint Patrick in Ireland, with the driving out of the snakes.
Yeah, when there's no snakes.
Yeah, no, yeah,
But the bards were understood as serpents because it means wise ones.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, the Druids, unfortunately, yeah.
Yeah, we're not quite getting the real history there, driving out the saints with that
No,
myth.
no, unfortunately not. But it's interesting how there are
Yeah.
so many, or how that story repeats itself
Yeah,
all over the world multiple
it is.
times. I mean,
Yeah,
the polyistic belief
yeah,
is that um, time, or what we recognize as time, works in cycles.
Mm.
So it's interesting that even on the smallest level, really, just the driving out of different people repeats itself, cycles over and over again.
yeah. So when you have the people of sons of Japheth, and we'll take, they're named Magog, and there's other names, they're going to move in with the people of Greece and Asia Minor. And so they're going to move into that Indo-Aryan settlements of the various groups, just as uh, the uh, the Romans, again from the same Japheth branch, they're going to migrate into Italy, but it's the proto people that are there. It's the Aboriginals. These are what we know as the Etruscans. They're known as a little bit sort of different name and within the
Yeah.
Etruscan language, but it's the same sort of people, and they have a kind of an interesting pantheon in themselves. I actually have a friend I do a show with quite regularly, and he's actually from Etruscan bloodline, and of the genera mystics is kind of who they refer back to into that ancient sort of history. And I'll just give you some of the names of their gods. It's transliterated into English, but Cern or Kern. But Canis is an interesting one, and Lupus is another interesting one. Raven is another one. Dracos is a really interesting one that crosses cultures. And this is names that they have passed down for their 9 stars, right? The 9 stars of their
Yeah.
pantheon. Why 9? I don't know. I don't know why it's not 7. I don't know why it's not 12, which is usually the 2 standards, but it's 9. But it represents something for sure.
Well, 9 is a very European pagan number. You have the 9 realms
Yeah.
of the Yggdrasil.
Yep.
You have the ring of Odin, who um, copies itself, or who makes identical rings every every night, every cycle, and 8 more, coming again to a total of 9. So it's a very like, I mean, yeah, it's quite cheesy, and everybody brings it up, of course. But Tesla, with the 3, 6, and 9, especially in
Yep.
Europe, or
Yep.
European paganism, of what I know, they seem to be very common and very important numbers.
Yep. Yes.
Even
And who
in
knows? And who
oh,
knows?
I
They may have had,
apologize.
I mean, I'm not that deep on the Etruscan religion, but they may have had a separation to denote something on that. There could be three other ones that still are important because, again, if you've got 12, even like if you're looking at the Olympian gods, you're not all that familiar with 9, 10, 11, and 12. You might be familiar with the top 4 or 5, right? So,
Yeah,
and so they just may have gotten more print, but that might be superficial. But they actually called themselves, the Etruscans in the old language, Racina, Toscana, and Terheni is the three names that I've researched
yeah,
and have been provided information on, not Etruscan. So I'm not sure how Etruscan comes about, if that's actually what they call themselves, but that
yeah.
could
That's
be a Latinized version of the name somehow, some way.
yeah, perhaps one of my good friends and right hand man in the tribe. He has done a lot of digging on the Etruscans and the Tyrrhenians, and he proposes, which I do think is a really good idea, and a good thought process, that the Tyrrhenians, they saw themselves as the sons of Tyr, um, which also gives them credit to the idea that Tyr, or Tivas, or Dias Pater, or whatever name you wanna give him, was at one point at the head of the pantheon, because there are really no tribes who call themselves the sons of Odin or the people of Odin, but then you have the Tyrrhenians,
Yep.
in a region which was still somewhat Germanic, or had a Germanic influence.
Well, I'll offer this, Stein. And when you brought this up before, it also reminded me of this thing. So I think it's both in response to what you just said, and then also a little bit before. The Shiva has a son. His name is Skanda, but he has many names, many names. Murugan, Subramanya, which means underneath God. That's literally what the name means, under God. But I'm trying to think. Kumara, which means the sun, like the Son, not Sun. And various other names. But anyways, he is also a war god. So he holds a spear. He is also associated often with Jupiter, like his planetary day, and he is associated with the lightning, but then he's also associated with synthesis. So, like the six-pointed star, he's often seen in the depictions with that, and he often rides a peacock as well as his Vahana. But I do think there's an interrelationship, and I've asked you, and we've spoken about this a little bit in DM about how I believe that there's maybe a conflation or an interrelationship between him and Tyr. But I think that there's also an aspect where Tyr can be very martial, and obviously he's a god of war. But then there's also a martial aspect of the planet Jupiter itself. Like I think there's a martial nature in that, and so maybe it's a deification of both of those things. Like there's a deity that is Mars oriented, but then there's also a deity that's martial but associated with Jupiter. I don't know if that even makes sense, but I just think that there's an interesting overlay there. And then with the sun, and then even in the Puranas, Skanda sort of disobeys his father, we'll say, and he throws his spear into the tree of knowledge, and the tree of knowledge splits into two. And then Shiva goes away onto the carnal ground to meditate, or the cremation ground. So very much like what Gary was saying about the lake of fire, or if you or Sheol, obviously it's more a little more like that, smoky and full of ghosts and etc.
Which again brings up a connection to Odin, who hung himself with his spear from a windswept tree, so that he may gain greater knowledge, and eventually discovering the runes and being able to use the runes and their magic.
That completely makes sense to me because Shiva gave Tantra to humanity. So he gave humanity both magic and the knowledge in which to use it through his going to the carnal ground. I think the only difference is that he slayed death. So in the Himalayan story, I mean, I'm not saying Odin did slay death. I'm just saying that Shiva is explicitly said to cut the head off death, and then he wears it as a mask. That's sort of his thing. It's shaped like a yak.
So what's also interesting is you also have Prometheus providing fire and knowledge. So it's a common sort of legacy around the world. And I'll just throw this one out because when I read this, and I can't remember who wrote it, but one of the things that this individual was talking about is when you look at these different pantheons, and you have all of these kind of similar traits, and they're going into lower levels of the hierarchy within the pantheon. They said that if you accept that above the pantheon, seems to be this force that is at the head, that is sort of in behind the scenes, however you want to describe it, is that as you go down the pantheon, each one of those gods has their own authority and position in the hierarchy, but will reflect certain aspects of the higher god. So in sort of a singular kind of way, or maybe they might have a couple of traits like that, and all of those traits are spread through each of those other gods within the pantheon.
I see Stein nodding, and I totally agree as well. That makes a lot of sense. That clarifies a lot, Gary. Thank you for that.
Yeah, no, that's a good one. Like I'm thinking of the gods that I know and the things that they would have in common, and there is so much. I mean, it's not all of it, but all of them have a trait that they share with another god. It may not be the same trait every time, but still there are traits that they do share with one another. Oh, that's fascinating. Thank you for that one.
Yeah, and I, when I try and again look for the patterns and things, is if I get too far into the pantheon, I start to get lost with these seemingly contradictions or conflicts, right? But that sort of helps me in saying, I don't know whether that's 100% true or how much of that's true, but it certainly helps me to stay focused on the upper of the pantheons, and try and boil back the major traits, and does that fit with the other gods and other pantheons that would have identical traits? It doesn't always fit, because one in Greek might have one that's missing from one that's in the various Hindu traditions or in other traditions, but there is a similarity in there. There is definitely a similarity in there. So the one I always have difficulty, though, that I find that is sort of kind of outside the norm, is Shiva. Seems to be antediluvian, but also post-diluvian, and is a destroyer god. It's like a pan god for me. It's like it's out of sorts.
He has a
degree in both.
I think that's a very good way to describe him. He has a daytime face and a nighttime face, and he has a creative and a destructive aspect. But he is, he is the encompassing sort of world father, if you want to say that, although he is not necessarily associated with Jupiter. But in one aspect of it, you could say he is also associated with Jupiter, because when he is sort of the king of the gods, he actually chooses to live on earth instead of living on heaven. So he lives on his holy mountain, Mount Kailash, instead of residing in the Deva palace, or the palace of the gods in heaven. He builds his palace on what is called the cremation ground. So he literally builds like a sort of a haunted house on this mountain, and so he's surrounded by the hosts, the ganas. So I think he is interesting, and I do think there is a parallel between aspects of him and Odin, especially in his more tantric or left-handed forms. But I agree with you, Gary, that he's a hard to pin down, and the name change, like from the about 2nd century BCE, and into later where he became Shiva, because formerly he was Rudra, but then sometimes he's called Agni.
Yep.
So his name change doesn't really help in the identification. But what I do think is interesting about what arose in later Hinduism is that he's associated with consciousness and also hidden consciousness, so knowledge or gnosis. So he has that daytime aspect where he's meditating, and then he has the nighttime aspect where he's kind of a raging storm god and awake. So that's the hidden knowledge, because it's the knowledge behind our minds at all times. So instead of making it phenomenological, they actually turned it into a conscious layer. Anyways, that's all I had on that. I thought I'd add that, but it's really, I find it really interesting and very complimentary, Gary. Everything that you've said, it's very, I'm making connections that I probably should have made a long time ago, but listening to you clarifies it for me.
Well, it's just there's so many questions, right, as you try and sort of learn this stuff, and you know, the ones that sort of stand out because I have difficulty sort of figuring how it fits, what's the greater meaning to it. They stand out for probably a reason that they should stand out, which means they deserve more attention in terms of trying to inquire as to who they are and what the outcome is. And I find, you know, Shiva and destroyer gods as very interesting as they show up in other cultures. And what's really interesting with the Shiva one is that, as I understand it, is that Shiva, as you say, is not only just destroyer god, but is the creator of worlds. So a destroyer of worlds and creator of worlds, but it creates new worlds from the destruction of the old world. And it's kind of like almost like the allegory that the Gnostics have with the phoenix rising up out of the ashes, right? Seems to be almost akin to that sort of understanding, so that when we have, whether it's biblically or in polytheism, this great destruction that comes by fire at certain times through the celestial procession, then that brings a greater importance to, if that's a complete destruction by fire, we've had that in the past, and Shiva is a god of destruction and recreation out of those ashes, deserves more attention to discover how that whole piece fits into the puzzle.
Absolutely. But there is something interesting about Shiva. I'll just add this as my last bit. But there is something interesting about him, is that his wife is his consort. So initially in their former worship, and especially, which is still preserved in Tamil Nadu, so the southern Dravidian part of India, but the northern part of India worships him more in the nighttime, or in the daytime sort of normative Orthodox mode. So the Tamils had this 12 forms, 12 yogas, they would call it. And so he in that sensibility was just called Shiva Siddhanta. He is a trinity with his wife and his son. The worship of his wife is somewhat secondary, especially in the Pala period, so 7th and 8th century. But then you also have the Antediluvian, so the more magical and nighttime rituals. So they had focused on him initially, but then they realized, oh, actually, if we do these things for the wife, we can access more power, whatever it is. So in the stories, the Puranas specifically, they reflect that the wife is really what brings Shiva back into material creation. So I think that is what it makes him interesting and different, is that she always plays the role of creating reality herself, and at times Shiva is in it because she wants him in it, and then there are times where he's out of it because he wants to be out of it. So he can both be in and out at different stages in what they call the Leela, or the divine play.
And this is why I had you on, Jin, because I know you can talk hours on this. Like, I have very little knowledge about the eastern side of things. I'm European, so I'm very northwestern.
So let's enter this into it then, just because we're talking about Shiva. And, just as Vishnu is an avatar and uses avatars, like Buddha, for example, and provided wisdom for Buddha, is that there's going to be in the Eastern tradition a Lord Maitreya or a new Buddha that comes along that would be one of those ones that leads us into godhood as one of the ones many on the way. And that you have in all religions sort of all around the world, you have this Messiah type character that's going to be coming back in the end time, just whatever you want to call them. You have the two Mahdis and the Sunnis and the Shia, for example, that are coming in the end time. And that one would presume that if this Lord Maitreya was going to have an avatar, this new Buddha, is it going to be Vishnu or is it going to be Shiva? Because Shiva also has many avatars, not as many as Vishnu, but let's say Narashima, which is a lion god sort of demigod aspect in the Hindu tradition, is one of the avatars. I think, and you correct me on this, but I think Shiva had something like 12 times as an avatar. Vishnu, I think, is closer to 20, as I understand the research. And that what happens in that process is they share the soul and the body and the spirit of the individual that's been born and provide wisdom or knowledge. So as we look at that, Shiva as being part of perhaps an end time destruction by fire to create this new world in going forward, we have that sort of fire by destruction all around the world in the end time. And in the Bible, we have an Antichrist type figure that would be viewed as the true Messiah by the rest of the religions of the world. And that this individual is going to receive power or knowledge from Satan and or the dragon. And I say that because in Revelation 13, Antichrist receives his power from the beast that comes out of the sea, and the dragon, as it's called. The dragon is also a reference to Satan in Revelation 12. That's one of, and as the serpent as well. And so we know that Satan can go into, biblically from a Christian perspective, we know he can go into a body of an individual and provide that avatar relationship. We get that with Judas in the Bible when he enters into Judas to give him the strength to betray Jesus. And so this power is coming from Satan, but is that power going to be provided by Satan? And is Satan Shiva, or is it another angel that this individual is going to receive the power from, just as Vishnu and Shiva both are avatars? And in the Christian tradition, this one is called the son of perdition. And the son of perdition is also the same title that's given to Judas. And the one who comes up out of the abyss prison to lead the watchers just before the midpoint of the last 7 years, from a biblical perspective, is called Abaddon and Apollyon, which in both Greek and Hebrew mean destroyer angel. And that Azazel was the leader of the Watchers, who was the destroyer of the Antediluvian world, and the scapegoat, as he's labeled, and the goat that is sacrificed on the Day of Atonement without explanation in Leviticus 16, which is the Hebrew word Azazel. And so you wonder whether or not there's a connection there with the Christ consciousness, and that is coming for the end time that's talked about in most of the polytheist religions around the world, and this destruction that's coming. And so is Shiva possibly going to be the avatar for, or is it going to be a Vishnu type of character?
Okay, well,
It's a really interesting sort of set of dynamics that are being talked about that have commonalities, but for me, it's kind of speculation at this point. Although I can take I'll just finish on this. I take the God that Antichrist worships in secret in Daniel 11 back to the Hebrew word Maus, which is the god of fortresses, and a god that his parents didn't know before. And that word goes back in its Hebrew etymology back to Az and Azaz, which is kind of interesting. But that god there isn't El or Elohim, it's Eloah. And that is the female suffix for. And it's like, is he worshiping the female goddess in secret? Or is that being used as it's understood in Hebrew when it's a female suffix? It can be understood as female or as in the applying the power or the action to the word. So in this case, I'll give another example. Gibberim means mighty one, and that's the male plural with the im suffix. And Gibberah is the female one. And Gibberah is used in the Old Testament as well, but for applying the power of the mighty one, as opposed to something being described as a mighty one. So it's an ambiguous sort of translation, but it's interesting that you could, again, take that one either back to both Satan and or Azazel, and is that going to be Vishnu or Shiva, or is it both? Does this one receive two powerful beings that are going to be his avatar?
Well, okay, so that is extremely interesting. Thank you, Gary. I know Sign's like blown away. I'm blown away. And so there's multiple interesting things. I'll try and be concise. So I think that you're onto something with the worship of the female divinity. I think you'll find this interesting that the female divinities, the female consorts in Puranic Hinduism are called Shaktis. Shakti, perfectly translated, means force. So it is, or the breath. You can also say it's prana. So you can say it is actually Shiva, but is his Shakti that manifests as or in the world. So it is the female, sort of the world mother, that is his wife. But it's also of him. So it's integrally related. So Vishnu is always immortal, like not immortal. He is a mortal. Whenever he is reincarnated in this world, he is a mortal being. Now, yes, he can take on chimeric, like you mentioned, Naram-Simha. There's others. There's Matsya, who is a fishtail. There is a korma, who has the body of a turtle. I mean, there's multiple. But so he usually comes as a man. And so in the next yuga, the prediction for his religion, because that's really its own religious tradition within Hinduism. Hinduism's a very nebulous term, but they believe that he will come back as a kind of popular, either a politician or a warlord or a celebrity, but someone messianic. But it has to be someone who is born a human. Now, in terms of who does he worship, that's really interesting. And he worships Maya. So what Maya is really the Shakti of Shiva. It's really his wife, because she is the light of illusory reality, the reality as it appears to us. So yes, so he does worship the great mother. That is his secret god. But really, Vishnu also worships himself. He sees himself as on the supernal mountain as the head god. Whether we understand that as being true or not, obviously people who follow Shiva or follow the Shaivite religion, they do not see Vishnu as being the top. They see Shiva or his wife or both of them together, the two, because two is a prime number, as being like that's the sort of governing force. But Shiva doesn't really want anything to do with reality, so it's up to her to govern. Also, another interesting thing, Gary, that you brought up was this idea of the fortress. Well, Durga, who is the wife of Shiva, her name literally means fortress. And all of the 8-pointed star forts in India that the British named are called Durgs, which also is exactly like the etymology of her name. Durga is just the feminine version. So a Durg is a fort. And so those 8-pointed star forts in India are all Durgs, but it also refers to her.
Yeah, and if we go back into history, the mother mater, Magna Mater, the mother goddess, the queen of heaven, was as powerful or sometimes even more powerful than the father. And that the Gnostics believe and the secret societies believe, as they get higher into their degrees, that the female is actually higher than the male in that hierarchy, just by a little bit. And so if that's the case, and if there is that universal religion that's coming and it's going to go back to its home roots, then that means the mother goddess has to come back to be even more important somehow, some way. And that's a really interesting sort of concept, because that's a long, you would think that's a long process to sort of get there. But yet that seems to be what they're telling us. And so I think we need to pay attention to that. Again, doesn't matter whether you're polytheist, monotheist, or secular. If this is going to be happening, we need to pay attention to what's going on. And so when I look at what I find extraordinarily odd biblically is that Satan doesn't have a consort, which is kind of a directly opposing everything you sort of understand about polytheism. And so,
Yeah.
or is that female consort just sort of temporarily not here, like in the pit prison or something? So we get this interesting character in the Bible called Leviathan, which is equivalent to Verta, which is equivalent to Lotam, and all the different types of female Leviathan, serpent type like gods around the earth. That's all slain as a female. Tiamat would be the most famous one out of the Sumerian pantheon, consort of Absu in that case. But Tiamat is also slain by, whether it's Marduk or who is it in the Hindu pantheon, Krishna, I think it is. I could be wrong on that one. My mind slips me on that. But it could be also Baal, that's in the pantheon in Egypt. But this is a story that's told all around the world, including the great dragon in Norse mythology, where the female is slain. And so we understand that this is also part of Jewish mysticism in creation, where there was a rebellion at the recreation of the earth, and that the female was slain, but the male wasn't. And so is this an allegory for Satan and for his consort, and that in the end time, Leviathan in the book of Isaiah is going to be slain? And is that female goddess coming up out of the abyss just before the midpoint, just before the Antichrist from the monotheist recollection of of that coming Messiah comes at the midpoint, and he's the one that's going to worship this Eloah in secret?
Well, you might find, Gary, you might find this interesting, is that Vishnu actually severs Shiva's consort into 51 different pieces, which form our sort of conception of the world, or the world. You could say it's the earth itself.
Yep.
So he slices her corpse. He doesn't kill her, but he slices her corpse up, and then she falls to the ground. Then Shiva descends from heaven, comes into the ground. With him comes the legion, or the hosts of ghosts and demons, and that follow him around. He doesn't really care. He doesn't really like them, but they do follow him. So there's something interesting there. And I also think, I think her story is the cycle. Like, if you were going to say something about the female consort, like what is her sort of theme? If Shiva is the mind and Vishnu is kind of like this worldly hero, you could say that the feminine consort really is, she is the cycle. She is the cycle of creation and destruction at both times, and it requires her to the third. So I see in the chat someone made a great post about the third is the second prime, only reduction to 3. So yeah, I think that that's true. I think you require a trinity in the recreation of what will come as the new world, but you only require the 2 perhaps as sort of the dissolution.
Yeah, I was thinking you even have a giant serpent who is being slain, although not by like if we were to say that Odin is Baal, then that would be slightly different. But you have the world serpent, of course,
Yep.
Jormungandr, who is a child of Loki, one of 3 children, one of 3 monstrosities, really, children who he begot with a giantess, Angrboda. And it is Thor who will. Well, it's a case of mutual slaying. He
Yep.
slays the serpent, but gets poisoned, takes 9 steps, I believe. There we go again with the 9, and then falls to the ground. But and Loki, or he may not be a devil, or however you want to call it, but you could say that of all the beings on the Yggdrasil, of all the gods and the higher beings, he is the one who would be closest to the evil spirits. He is a trickster, but he does it for his own gain, for his own pleasure, for his own amusement, and he is the one who also causes the death of Balder, who is sort of a messiah like figure, the lightest, most beautiful of all the gods. And because of that image, it is there are questions if Balder is like written into the story to be like kind of the Christ, so that it would make conversion easier, like, see, you guys have a Christ too. um and Balder, like, that's the story of resurrection, as well as, for example, is Persephone in the Greek myths. So in every, well, every pantheon has its giant snake who is, or just evil snake-like figure who is a child or consort or aligned with, well, let's just say the most evil spirit.
Yeah, and I think I got that wrong with Krishna. I think it's Indra. Is now that I think about it, that is the one that slays Verda in the Vedas. So yeah, this is a standard story told all around the world, um, and it's something that I don't know whether it is coming back or not. Um, but when we're looking at that Mother Queen of Heaven aspect, and those are major titles throughout the pantheons, and the Queen of Heaven's also recorded in the Bible as well. So you have a religion that is coming in the end time, but it's before the Antichrist one. But in that religion, you have this woman riding the beast empires, and the beast empires are the empires of the giants and the bloodlines of the giants that create the great empires. And the 7th one is yet to come, with Antichrist will overthrow from the inside and become the 8th. But this is the woman Babylon that rides these beast empires, that in by riding the allegory, to me, would indicates that she controls or reigns over them. And in all of the main empires around the world, in terms of the world empires or the large empires, 2 distinctions there, you have that hierarchy of this bloodline ruler of the king that comes from the gods, and you have this religion that is part of that hierarchy that's imposed, and that this is understood as Babylon biblically And these religions are the daughters of Babylon. And Babylon goes back to Hebrew Babel, as it's used for the Greek term in the Bible. It can also mean Babylon as a city and as the empire as well. But it's the Hebrew word Babel that's important, because that's that universal religion that's imposed by Nimrod that we talked about. That is that antediluvian religion. And the same religion, as we talked about, as being what the migrating Noahites from Babel are going to move into the giants, who have the same religion, maybe different proto names, and that's why you get a mixing of the names. And that this is coming back in the end time. And in the 7 hills of Rome, that Revelation 17 says Babylon is going to sit on as the Queen of Kingdoms, that's going to rule over these 10 king empire 10 groups of nations or empires of the world, is that these are the 7 hills where the queen sits, and it's also a city. So it's a city with 7 hills, and the best 7 hills one in the world is Rome, with the 7 hills of the Etruscans, with Palatine Hill being the center of the hill and the center for the Magna Mater and the Sibylline prophecies. And Vaticanus Hill was outside the original city of Rome. Now it was about 800 AD. There was walls that included Vatican Hill. It was a branch hill, Etruscan hill of worship, for the Palatine Sibylline prophecies of the Etruscan worship. And for people who aren't familiar with the Sibylline prophecies, it has an interesting history of how it really sort of comes back into the Roman Empire in the time of Hannibal. I won't get into that, but understand this is also understood in the Greek and Anatolian empires with the same prophets, and very much associated with the oracles of Delphi, same type of thing, but slightly different. But this is the female prophet religion, and she's known as the Magna Mater there. And this is the place where the Babylon sits in the end time and imposes this world religion. So Babylon in the end time is known biblically in 4 different components: as a city, as I said, it is 9 times. You have to understand it that way. It's also known as a universal religion, this ancient religion that started as the mother, all the daughter religions. So it's that ancient religion of the pantheon. And it is a geopolitical organization because she controls the 10 kings, and is the glue and the I think the thing that ignites the ability through her prophets, prophecies predicted and fulfilled, probably contrived from a monotheist perspective, but nonetheless will bring everybody back to the home religion. And it's understood as a global economic organization that controls all of the trade. And this is the empire that Antichrist takes over and then destroys Babylon and sets up that new worship and religion.
That's interesting, because you could say that the think tanks of, for example, the World Economic Forum, the World Health Organization, they are giants, just different type of giants. They're giant organizations.
Yeah.
Companies like Microsoft, Amazon, the
Oligarchs.
Tesla, or whatever else he's doing. They are billion-dollar corporations. They are giant corporations, and what they are pushing is a very feminine energy. There's a very feminine energy laying over the world, over society right now, because it's all about needing to be taken care of, mitigating, and preferably erasing all danger in whatever form that may be. Or everyone be soft and love each other, and especially for for the man, preferably even be women, or like women, or transform yourself into a woman. So I would say that if the mother is returning, I would say that she is well on her way.
Yep, I would say so too. And what you're describing is what they call the beehive,
Yeah,
and with the queen bee at the top, right? Not
yeah.
that there aren't male drones, but that worker sort of class, sort of below the royales, and not necessarily having a sex or be anything that you want and everything that sort of goes with it. And that they have this sort of special kind of communication. So now you see the technology, and it was being talked about at the last economic forum, as you mentioned, in the Davos crew, which connects into the Committee of 300 and the Thelemic Tree in terms of the structure as part of that branch organization. They're trying to advance not only AI, but what was also announced is that they're going to be able to communicate between each other through these implants into the brain in short order.
Mm, yeah.
And that becomes that sort of hive telepathy that they like to promote. And so the queen bee in the hive is very much part of the hive mind, in like mind, um, that they like to think. And if you take the Anjou and de Vere bloodlines, which is the junior offshoot is the Plantagenet, back in their history, I mean, they look at that fleur de lis in their heraldic terms as also being not only important as the lily, but also could be portrayed as a bee, and that they take their bloodline back to sort of Anu. I won't go into all the minutiae of how it gets there. You do that in book 2, but so they believe that they had the telepathic powers at one point in time that they only have hints of today, and they're trying to bring that back, and that as giants, as the royales, they could work with one mind to do things that you couldn't do by yourself. And so what's interesting about that hive mind mentality is we get some really interesting, and most people overlook details about when Israel went into the land of the giants, overrun by giants and hybrid giants. And that one of the things God provided them in the Bible to discombobulate the giants were hornets. And so hornets are the natural born enemy of the honeybee. And so it allowed Israel to go just walk up to them and take their heads off. Because the only way you can make sure a giant stays dead is you got to take the heads off. But and they were so discombobulated that they would start fighting each other. So if they were in that telepathic communion and that was completely disrupted, and they're born into that constant communication, they would be in a state of discombobulation or panic and not sure maybe of what to do, and more easily able to be slain. And the key is that you got to take their heads off, but that's a different story, to keep them dead or to send them right to the pit prism or whatever it is.
Mm.
But for some reason, the royales all around the world, and I document this in book 2, the worst death you could have as a royale is to lose your head, because you couldn't get to the heaven that you wanted to get to in your death.
Oh, maybe that's why during the French Revolution, the guillotine was so incredibly popular. To
Yes, it was, I think, and why beheading is going to be a big part of the Antichrist reign. Because you have
oh,
to remember the duality. Not everybody's going to support him.
yeah, because that's still something that well, let's say more extreme religious groups in the Middle East, that's still something they
Yeah.
prefer to do.
Yeah,
The
they don't want
uh,
any jinn coming
beheading.
back and haunting
Yeah.
them or anything like that. And what's also interesting is biblically, and I give examples of where that tradition comes from, and but there's an interesting story in the Bible that sort of emphasizes this. And so, and I'll be trying to be quick on this. Is when John the Baptist, after he's baptized Jesus, he's captured by Herod, and then he has his head taken off, right?
Yeah.
Which would be, you don't really, okay, they took heads all the time, but then Jesus starts his commission in the Valley of Galilee and starts preaching and doing miracles. And Herod is absolutely beside himself because he thinks it's John come back, that he's healed himself, and he can't understand how, because he took his head. And he doesn't realize that it's a different person. But we
Oh.
don't get explanation for why he's in such great fear, but just that he thinks it's John. And we're not given sort of the context of it.
Oh, that would make sense. Actually. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, wow.
And just to jump in, they're all tantric deities in particular, but also Shiva and Kali are always depicted wearing fresh skulls, almost sometimes skulls, sometimes heads, and but usually Buddhist deities have fresh heads, and it's a specific. There's a specific reason as to why, but 50 or sometimes 108, obviously going back to that 9 number, very perennial as well. It's a very it's the god materialized into form. There's something a little masculine about it, but there's also something that can be feminine about it. It's a very interesting number, actually. And yeah, so I think, and there's also a Buddhist goddess who severs her own head. So when she's ready to be done with the play that she's created, or you could also say that it is her, she severs her own head, and then she can be released into the higher worlds or the higher heaven, or however you want to describe it.
And the thought is the reason why taking the head is so important is that it's so sudden and lethal, is that ability to heal yourself that the demigods had doesn't have time to react to it.
Oh, that actually, yeah, because even with us humans, I know that I'm not sure if it was during the French Revolution. It would definitely be one of the best times to do that. But there has been experiments done that, especially after a swift execution, a swift, cutting off, that the at least like the basic motor functions for a few seconds, for a very short amount of time, that it still works. That I believe eyewitnesses even said that when somebody's head, I don't know who exactly, but was in the basket, that they could still see the eyes blinking, which would mean that there is still some, well, literally some brain function going on. um so, like, yeah, like, especially as a god, you wouldn't notice. You literally wouldn't notice, so therefore your regenerative powers, yeah.
So your brain is no longer be able to send signals to your body to repair
Yeah,
itself.
and with that also comes another kind of discombobulation. Like,
Yep.
you'd get very confused, or, well, literally your brain would get confused because it's wanting to send those signals but can't find anything. Oh, that makes it even more gruesome than it already is.
Yeah. Yeah. And certainly explains a lot of things throughout history.
Yeah, it does, actually. Wow. Ugh. No thanks. I like to keep it for now. I mean, I'll lose my head in a metaphorical way. That's good enough for me. Oh man, we have discussed so many things already. We have been going for like 2 hours, 2 hour plus. Jin, was there anything that you wanted to bring up, maybe as a last quick topic, last thing?
Sure. Well, I will just say thank you, Gary, so much. I've been a big fan for quite a few years. I've heard you on Lee's show multiple times, and with Robbie Marks, who I'm friends with, and obviously I'm friends with Stein. And so it's just, this is really a pleasure. And thank you so much, Stein, for inviting me, because you could have invited a lot of people, but you invited me. So I really appreciate that. And thank you so much, Gary. I really appreciate your time and that you sat down to talk with two wizards. And so I think I don't know, Gary, what is the line of research that you are really interested in right now, but you haven't necessarily explored fully, but is capturing your eye?
Yeah, I've completed 2 books, and I've got another one that I've started, but there's another book that I really want to do in book 4. And we sort of touched on it early on in the show. So it's good, would deal more with a whole bunch of different things that the Bible doesn't like to deal with, but we can take back biblically. So one of those things would be, how old is the earth? Um, and lay that out. And I do it a little bit in the first book, but I think I really need to lay it out for Christians right back to the Hebrew original words, so you can get the full sort of understanding to the meanings, that we're probably in a world that's a lot older. And that would probably be a better position for the angelic rebellion, when the earth would have been destroyed by fire down to its foundations. I would want to go more into that and link in 2 Peter 3 with that um, interesting passage in there. But that would be sort of one of the types of things that I would want to do. And I would want to weave it into the different kinds of giants um, that are out there, and taking them back to the kind of the god or fallen angel that um, they would have come from. And what's interesting, for example, is you get in Pistis Sophia, which is a Gnostic gospel, you get this pit prison of parent gods that are in there, and you get these angels with all sorts of different faces. So not just like a serpent for a seraphim, not just the 4 faces that would be on a um, cherubim, but you get like faces of a bear and things like that, faces of a dog. And so these are obviously, if they're accurate, that they would be descriptions of other ranks of angels that we don't get a description for. And I go through the hierarchy of the angels in book 2, so that you understand sort of the major orders of them, at least the ones that were provided. And I provide descriptions of the ones that are described, but where we don't have it. Um, like in with one of the gods, the Avim giants worshipped after the flood, not only Nergal, which was a lion-faced god and war god, but Nebaz, a barking god, and depicted with a dog or a jackal's head, just as Anubis was a jackal-headed god. And I wonder whether or not that might be what's referenced as that type of angel in that pit prison. So I want to get into the parents and all the different kinds of the Nephilim that may have been produced both before and after the flood, and get into those kinds of sort of details. It's kind of a more out there type of book. Haven't quite figured out how to tie it all in there together, but it will come to me, and I continue to put pieces of that research together as I'm working on book 3. So
It sounds like you have your work cut out for you. I Yeah, Jin, thank you so much for co-hosting with this one. It's always good to have you on, especially since you can bring so much of the more Eastern stuff into it, which ties into, well, pretty much everything, as we have discovered over the close to 2.5 hours now. Um, and of course, Gary, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for sharing your knowledge, sharing your wisdom. This was absolutely fascinating, and I have definitely come to some conclusions as well. Also, a lot of new questions that I would like to have answered. But I mean, that's good. It's a forever pursuit of knowledge and wisdom.
it is. And I really love the opportunity to come and sort of talk about all the different common history that we have, so we can better understand the world that we're going in, so that people understand is there's outcomes to this world that we live in that are talking about the same kinds of events. They have a different outcome, perhaps, but they're all talking about the same thing. And once one gets on to that, whether or not whatever you end up believing, make a decision so you know why you believe. And that's why I present information. I mean, would I love people to switch to be Christians? Absolutely. But I'm more of a fan to give you information so that you can decide for yourself what you believe and why we're here and what's going on in the world today. And understand that no decision is a decision. So learn more, make your own decision.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. Where can the good people who are listening, who are watching, where may they find your work?
You can get a hold of me and find what my work looks like through my website, which is the easiest, best way to go. And that's the Genesis6conspiracy.com. Genesis 6, the number 6conspiracy.com. On that website, there's a contact the author. So if you want to ask me a question, or if I did mention a document on something, or if you want to know whether or not I have a document, I supply documents at no charge. So um, if you get a hold of me, it might take me 3 months to get back to you. I'm trying to wind that down. I'll be working on that to get it back down to 3 to 4 weeks, but just be patient. I will get back to you. On my website, there is a generous excerpt of all 98 chapters of book 1 and all 84 chapters of book 2. You'll find out very quickly whether or not that's the book for you or not. And just because you've read a generous excerpt of every chapter, it's a small drop of the bucket of the information that's recorded in any of my books. So much so that you need to read it as you can digest it, because the information just never stops coming at you. And that if you're interested in getting a signed copy, you can go to the Buy Now page on the website. And no matter where you live in the world, I have it split up into 3 groups. If you're in the US, go to the US page. If you're in Canada, go to the Canada page. I live in Canada. And if you are anywhere else in the world, there's an international page. So you can buy book 1 or book 2 or both, and just go to the appropriate page. You can also link over to barnesandnoble.com from the website, amazon.com and amazon.ca. Also from the website, you can link over to Amazon to get the Kindle edition for book 1 and for book 2. The Audible version for book 1 just came out in August, and it's available through Amazon Audible and through iTunes. I'll be getting links up on that. And book 2 has been delayed. We were hoping to have it out in October, but the narrator has flatlined 3 times in a health issue that he's going through and starting to recover. So we're still hoping to have it out before Christmas, but that one's been delayed, and that'll be through Amazon ACX that distributes through Amazon Audible and iTunes for people who want the Audible version. So that's the best, easiest way to find out who I am, what I talk about, and where to get my books.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. I will, of course, make sure to leave the important links in the description box down below. Good to know that it's on Audible as well. I recently bought Audible for myself and my wife, so I'll actually get it on Audible. I read through a good chunk in preparation, but boy, it's a lot. It definitely is a lot. Um, Jin, plug your stuff real quick, man. You definitely have some good stuff going on yourself.
Thank you, Stein. I appreciate that. So if people want to follow me, you can follow me on X, Wukong Reborn, Wukong Reborn. I'll call a reject as a Stein, and we do shows together. But I've been asked a lot by Nick lately to be his kind of like a ninja co-host. So I often have been doing that, and so we will be doing that. We have a series, a big, really interesting Left Hand Path series coming up. I think people will be really excited about. And I have my own show, Threshold Saints. You can find it Spotify, Anchor, and now Apple. So I have an episode coming out tomorrow on Michael Hoffman and that sort of that material. And obviously I approach it from my, I look at it from a Kabbalah positive perspective. So it's not just Michael Hoffman with his more interesting conspiracies, we'll say, but it's me being more, I'm trying to be more fruitful and rounded in it, and I have a really interesting guest on that episode, so that'll be out tomorrow. And I have my Tracy Twyman series continues, 5 parts. Yeah, and anime and occultism. I'm doing a series with Monty from the Nice podcast, and we're doing different series on anime, and we look at the colors, the numerology, the kind of archetypal characters, the hero's journey, and figure out how if it is or isn't a magical sort of story. And so yeah, so everybody can check that out if you're interested. And thank you so much, Sign, and thank you again, Gary. It was honestly a huge honor. I was like over the moon when Stein asked me last night. So thank you so much, and thank you both.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. I'll make sure to leave all your links in the description box down below. Occult and anime. That sounds like a fascinating combination. I've seen bits and pieces from other podcasts before, so very curious as to what you will find and how you will take it. So yeah, thank you all for joining me on this amazing episode of the Grey Horn Pagans podcast with two amazing people in Gary Wayne and Jin the Ninja. Thank you all who were in the live chat. I have been trying to keep up. You are all absolutely wonderful. Of course, thank you to all who will be watching later. If you want to find out more um, on what we do with the Grey Horn Pagans podcast and the tribe of the Grey Horn Pagans, you can simply go to our website, www.greyhornpagans.com. Everything is on there, from our podcast to Substack to whatever else our tribal members and tribal allies have going on. And Slick, don't worry, I will put up all the links for Gary, for Jen, and of course the Grey Horn Pagans podcast in the description box. If you give me a moment to edit all of it, I will make sure that it is all there. If you liked what you saw, if you like what you heard, make sure to leave a like on this video. Leave something nice in the comments if you weren't in the live chats. Make sure to share this with everyone, just everyone. This is knowledge that everyone can use, everyone has a use for, whether they may know it or not. If you are listening to this on the audio platforms, leave a 5-star rating. It does help out a lot. If you want to support us a little further, we also have a Patreon. Again, just go to our website, www.greyhornpagans.com. Everything, and I do mean everything, is on there. I thank you all. Until next time, this has been an amazing show. Signing off. Bye bye.